3, 2. Welcome to Gigacast episode 14 for Sunday, April 8th, live to tape from America's Heartland. I'm Britton Johnson.
And broadcasting live from my home lab, I'm Tony Reeves.
That almost worked.
Almost.
So, man, it was a crazy week last week, Tony.
It was an awesome week. We had UserCon last week.
We had UserCon in Wisconsin, and you were not supposed to present, but you ended up presenting.
Yes.
Thanks to our good friend, Mr. Ariel Sanchez.
I call it the Ariel effect. He's pretty much like, so, yeah, you're doing the presentation with me. I'm like, I am?
Yeah. And, I had Rod Gabriel, the leader, one of the leaders of the VMUG crew. I had reached out to him before the UserCon, and was asking if I could do it if there was an open spot. There was not, and then he contacted me the night before and was like, "Oh, there might be an opening because somebody might be sick. So can you be an emergency fill-in?" And I'm like, "Okay, sure." But that guy ended up being okay, so I didn't have to do it. But I'm just I was just kind of waiting in the wings the whole time. Like, am I going to have to do something or not? Hopefully I can pull an NSX presentation out of my bag and just do it.
Yeah, it was my first UserCon as a board member as well. So it was an interesting perspective change there.
Lots of good stuff, though. We, on our YouTube channel, we posted the vCloud Foundation presentation that my brother Heath gave. And that's.
I wonder how many people are going to make that connection for the first time. That he's your brother.
Maybe. Well, he's gonna. I promised him finally that he's going to come on the show whenever the next release of vCloud Foundation comes out. So
cool.
He wanted.
Good episode.
He was feeling left out, so I had to throw him a bone. But so it's been just and at the same time, record number news, Tony. Our last show with Chris Williams, Mr. Mistwire. We are over 60 downloads of the audio episodes.
Wow, that's more than every other episode combined.
Yeah, it's crazy. We actually have people listening to this show. So,
wow.
Hence our guest today. And speaking of our guest today, there's a guy sitting here, and Jase, has anybody ever told you that you sound, if you're just listening to you talk, you sound a little bit like Tim McGraw?
Like Tim McGraw?
Yeah.
Really? That's interesting. That's interesting. I can't say that I've heard that one before.
All right. Well, go watch the movie The Shack, and you might figure it out. Okay.
So I have a little bit of a southern accent, huh? Just a little.
Just a little bit, because he tries to hide it in that film, and so it's it doesn't work out.
I don't try to hide it.
It doesn't work out because he's not an actor. Anyways, Jase McCarty's here.
Yeah. Hey, I appreciate you guys having me. Thanks.
Thanks for being here, Jase.
I'll do my best not to speak like I'm talking to my parents, because then I would really sound like I was from the South. So fortunately, me, my brother, my sister, we don't really talk like we're from the South for the most part. But
that's okay.
Every now and then we get on the phone with our parents, and it sounds like a NASCAR pit crew conversation.
So where are you originally from, Jase?
Mississippi, actually.
All right.
Yeah, and then I moved to Louisiana in the early 2000s time frame, and then moved to Colorado about 6 months ago, a little bit more than 6 months ago.
Sweet. So, Jase, obviously you and Tony have connected through many years of VMware and vSAN and all that goodness. And we'll get into that more. I met you a couple of times briefly when you were at the Wisconsin UserCon last year, and then at VMworld briefly. So, but you and I have never really had a conversation, so this is our first real introduction. So It's nice to really meet you.
Well, I'm looking forward to being. I'm actually trying to find out right now whether I'm going to be back UserCon in June. Is that right? June 12th. I may or may not be at the
Minneapolis.
That's right. Always.
Minnesota. Yeah.
Yeah. No, wait. Yeah. Actually, that is Minnesota.
Yeah.
Minnesota. My bad.
That's okay. But so I, unlike Tony, don't know all that much about you. So can you give me and everybody else who doesn't know who you are the 60-second introduction to Jase McCarty?
Oh, I don't know if I can do it in 60 seconds, but I'll do my
120.
best, right, as far as that goes. All right, hold on. I'm going to put my timer on here. Give myself a countdown, so I'm not.
I would ask Alexa, but she would screw it up.
Okay, so just kind of high level. I one of those folks that never really makes up their mind what they want to do. I change things around a fair amount. I couldn't tell you how many majors I had in college, that type of thing. Used to work on C-141 Starlifter aircraft, specifically the avionics systems, guidance control, inertial navigation, that type of stuff. Did that for a few years and then got into IT, right? And when I say I got into IT, I was doing a little bit of everything for, roughly about 15 years. I spent about 5 years in academics, 5 years in health insurance, 5 years in financials, working for a service provider. I've done web development. I've done curriculum development. I actually taught at Tulane adjunct for a couple of years. Taught at University of Phoenix for about 5 years adjunct. Like I said, was a web design guy, was a development guy. I've done infrastructure, Active Directory, messaging. I used to actually write some pretty intricate code against Exchange 5.5 back in the late 90s.
Good times were there.
Yeah. And I used a special version of it. It was called DMS 5.5, which was a U.S. military only version of it. It was a defense messaging system is what it was. So it was a little bit different. Nice. Yeah, it was a kind of a little offshoot. But with that being said, I moved over to the vendor side back in 2010 and was a V specialist for EMC, focusing primarily in the federal space for almost 5 years. And I've been here at VMware. Actually, Friday was 3 years.
Wow.
So with that being said, it's appreciate that. So I'm typically about 5 years at a time, right? So 5 years academics, 5 years health insurance, 5 years financials, 5 years EMC. So I guess I have about 2 years left here at VMware, and then maybe at that point I'll get a job.
I don't think Pat's listening, so you're okay.
Doing tech marketing or something like that for Teraflex or for Bestop or Metal Cloak or some other Jeep accessory manufacturer or that type of thing.
Or just wait 5 minutes and the cloud weather will change and somebody else will have a giant product out there.
Yeah, but it's been, I mean, they've been pretty much, avionics for 5 years, and then
so what branch of the military were you with?
Air Force.
You were in the Air Force, okay.
Yeah, I did actually.
I'm not. I probably just showed how little I know about the United States Armed Forces.
So,
but in my defense, the Marines have planes.
They do. The Navy has planes, and the Army has planes and helicopters, right? That type of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I did almost 25 years in the military, with the first 5 being aircraft maintenance, and then the last 19 being communications, which basically translated to me being part of and ultimately running a data center.
Well, in all sincerity, Jase, thank you for your service to the country.
Thanks. Yep. I appreciate that.
So, okay. So we have, I guess since you're at VMware today, what is your kind of day-to-day role within VMware right now?
So I work in what we call the Storage and Availability Business Unit.
Okay.
And we kind of shorthand that to SABU.
Mm-hmm.
People say SABU and they don't know what you're talking about, but it's Storage and Availability Business Unit. And what we really do is we focus on a couple different products: vSAN, Site Recovery Manager, vSphere Replication, vVols, and some other things that we've kind of got in the works that we aren't really talking about, at this time, right? That type of thing. Within that, and keep in mind, I'm not a field person, so I don't typically go out and meet with customers and that type of thing. I do from time to time when there needs to be a real nitty gritty, hard nose, under the covers type conversation, and I may work with customers and our field teams and that type of thing, just like the rest of the guys on the team that I work on. But from a breakdown, you've got product management, product marketing, and then you've got kind of our group. And our group is, and not engineering, but then you've got our group, which is tech marketing, which is what I directly report into, specifically the vSAN side of things. And then we've got a product enablement team, and we've also got a POC team. And the product enablement team, they're the ones who will work on the reference architectures and the forward-looking type stuff, specifically within, let's say we want to bring X new, package that's been around for however long. You want to validate it on vSAN, right? They'll do that type of thing. And then at the same time, we've got our Octo group, our Office of the CTO, people like Duncan Epping, Cormac Hogan, Paudio Reardon. Those guys are in that group, and they do a little bit of customer zero stuff, and then they also do some evangelical and then forward-looking type stuff. Me, fortunately, I get to just focus on what we're shipping today and what's going to be shipping soon, and then I kind of focus on a couple little areas specifically within that. But the best part about this job is the team I get to work with. Got a bunch of great folks.
So are you doing like just a lot of technical writing, presenting, researching on how to deploy stuff? Is that too broad?
A little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, right?
Yeah.
So some of it's creating collateral for our field teams and for our partners. So that's some of it. Some of it is evangelism. We get the opportunity to speak at VMworld sometimes when our sessions are voted on and are popular, that type of thing. Other times we get to work directly with some of our partners, whether it be Dell EMC, Lenovo, Hitachi, whatever. And then we also get to work really, really closely with our product management team, right? And our product management team, they're the kind of the folks that guide the direction of a product. Just as an example, let's say, hey, I think we should be doing this way. Well, why do you think that? Well, because this would bring a lot of value to our customers. And then we kind of act as a catalyst to get the ball rolling that direction, right? That type of thing.
Okay.
So
cool.
I like to tell the PM guys that quite often we're the voice of reason.
Well, that's good. So before Tony just takes over the conversation and you guys go crazy on vSAN.
I'm not going to take over.
Yeah, I can tell you're just jumping at the bit.
I'm waiting.
So I have a couple of idiot questions, and you can just bear with me on these.
Well, there are no idiot questions. They're just unfamiliar questions.
Well, there's that. So I kind of, and this is sort of, I guess these first couple are kind of one and the same, so I'll try to maybe put them into one question. Why would VMware want to create a storage product, and who in the world are they trying to compete against?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
I don't know if I'm qualified or authorized to answer that. But
give me your best shot at it, because VMware, it's a software company, right? And typically, they work really closely with storage vendors, your Pures, your HPs, your EMCs, and even at one point, VMware was wholly owned by a storage company, and so it's why would they necessarily come up with a product that directly competes against their owners? So
I don't know if I would choose the term directly compete. I would really say more along the lines of provides choice, right?
Okay.
It's
fair.
Provides choice,
That's
right?
Fair, yeah.
As far as the why, I'm not, I couldn't say why the decision was originally made, but I will say from where we fit and where we can provide a lot of value, that type of thing, and is to me. And let me just kind of look at it from a previously being a customer perspective, right?
Okay.
So as a customer, I managed storage. I didn't really do as much on the networking side. We had some folks that did that, but I really focused on compute, virtualization, and storage, right? And one of the challenges that what happened seems like we'd have 4 or 5 different arrays, and literally every year or every other year, one of those was, let's say going off of maintenance. It was, older generation, whatever, that type of thing. Servers, it was really, really easy, to replace them, right? Because they're commodity. Let's say one day, I remember when I was working for the financial service provider, we were all IBM at the time, and it was just one of those um, uh, top-down orchestrated decisions, if you will. You guys will use IBM, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. Now, before that company had been purchased into the larger company, they were all HP, or actually all Compaq at the time.
Okay.
And we ended up moving back to HP over time and that kind of thing. And I'm not saying one's better than the other, that type of thing. That's just kind of what we preferred. But from a compute perspective, it was really, really easy, right? So if you look at virtualization in itself, especially since we've brought about storage vMotion, EVC, to make sure that we can move between processors without disruption, all those pieces, right? To me, from a VMware perspective, the fact that we're providing software-defined storage as well as software-defined networking, we're already doing essentially software-defined compute. They seem to be logical offerings, if you will, in the grand scheme of things. Now, the great thing is it was still commodity underneath, that type of thing. And we do have obviously a compatibility guide, like, vSphere's got its own HCL, that type of thing. But I think really to kind of, what's the word I want to look for? What's the word that we normally always use, right? To obscure the what's underneath from a compute, networking, or storage perspective. It's just a good fit. It's funny. I remember in I think vSAN 6.5, we introduced iSCSI support. Now, it was a limited iSCSI support, and it was really only intended for some low-hanging fruit. Let's say, you've got, let's say 60, 80, 200 virtual machines or whatnot. Then you've got this one server in the corner that needs a block device, right? That's kind of what we were trying to address with that, And I remember going and talking with a partner that sells vSAN, but also sells large iSCSI and fiber channel based arrays and that type of thing. And as I'm talking to them about this, they're all looking at me like, so vSAN's going to take on my block business now, huh? And it's like, no. That's not what this is for, right? It's not what this is for.
That's always the fear, though, right? It's
it could be, but and I don't want to be misrepresentative of the product and say that vSAN is not for the majority of workloads. It can be. It really can be, right? The majority.
Yeah. Well, and like with anything, it's all down to the engineering.
Well, it's down to the engineering. It's down to what
requirements and all that.
Requirements are, exactly, that type of thing. Now, from working with the federal government when I was at EMC previously, I've seen some deployments that had literally the most expensive, most redundant, most available systems that you can imagine with less than 20 terabytes total, right? And you would think, wow, we're spending all this money on this, particular configuration. But it was because of the levels of reliability and the amount of risk they were willing to take and that type of thing, right?
Yeah.
And so, kind of where I'm going with this is I think vSAN, whether it's the smallest, and I'm not going to do any product pitches or anything like that, but we can do really, really well in 2-node type configs or 3-node type configs, but then we've got some enterprise customers that have multiple upwards of approaching 64-node clusters, right? Yeah. So the thing I like about it the most, and the challenge that I think that our field and our partners that sell vSAN quite often run into is you have a conversation with a team, and typically the VMware folks always have that conversation with the virtualization admins, right? Mm-hmm. And then you get a storage admin, involved in the conversation. The storage admin's like, "Hey, you're here to take my job." And I don't really look at it from that perspective, right? And the reason being is because when I was with that financial service provider before coming to EMC, I was working 80, 90 hours a week, and in that job there were two people who knew how to manage storage. There was me and my boss, which meant it was me, right?
Exactly.
And when an application owner comes to me at 4:00 on a Friday afternoon. I'm just about to walk out the door, and they say, "Oh yeah, we got a change request, emergency change request for tonight for our maintenance window, and we need you to carve up some storage. It needs to be available between these times, and so on and so forth. And we're going to need you available to make sure blah 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 blah." And and I'd shake my head. It happened every time, and there was nothing I could do about it because I was the only guy who knew how to zone, who knew how to carve up a LUN, whether it was our EMC array, whether it was our NetApp filer, whether it was our HP, array, whatever. I was the only one. 2:00 in the morning, I'm like, all right, guys, I got to get out of here. I got a soccer game at 8:00 in the morning. And at 8:05, I'm sitting at the soccer field with a hotspot, and I could, dew everywhere and the sun glistening and, and I'm trying to resolve the problem. And to me, the thing about vSAN that I really like the most is really the whole storage-based, storage policy-based management that we have, and the fact that anybody can deploy a VM and they can go in and they say, well, I want this disk to have these properties from a protection and performance perspective, this disk to have these properties, and so on, right? Mm-hmm. And then our storage guys are going to say, well, hey, if you don't need LUNs and you don't need this and you don't need that, then why do you need us? Well, in my mind, in my opinion, storage admins are the ones that know performance characteristics of applications. Storage admins are the ones that know how to plan capacity, whether it be growth or reclamation or whatever. Storage admins are the ones that know how to look at performance, bottlenecks, troubleshooting, things like that. They're the ones that need to do that. I remember when I was an admin, so much of my day was just putting out fires as opposed to doing the things I needed to do.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate side of being an administrator is that is like 75 to 90% of your time is just putting out fires and cleaning up other people's messes. And it's necessary because only you know how to do it. So,
and that's the thing I love about vSAN, right? Is the fact that I can let those storage admins focus on the underneath, and my application owners, whether I do it through some type of cloud management platform or with direct access.
So, like,
they can go in.
And so NSX was an acquired product. Was vSAN in-house developed product, or was that something
in-house developed? Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting.
Years before I got here. I got here in 2015, and it had been started years and years before that.
Because there was another product before vSAN was released.
The VSA.
Yeah. The virtual storage appliance or whatever it was called. And I briefly looked at it, and then I went to go download it, and then that was like when vSAN was released, and you couldn't even get it anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, so is there a specific customer that VMware is targeting for vSAN deployments, or is it just kind of a whoever thinks they want it? Like, is it a small to medium enterprise thing? Where, you can do 2 nodes, which a lot of my customers are 2-node customers. But is it for larger enterprises who I guess this is a dumb question maybe, but because I know there's local hospitals in town here where they literally have everything. So they have HPs, they have EMCs, they have Hitachis, they probably have vSAN, they have Nutanix, they have it all. So so in that regard, yes, it probably is for larger enterprises who want to have everything because they already have everything anyway. So what's in one more?
Well, think about it from the perspective of like when I was working for that financial service provider, right? We would go on, we would put forth some, new initiative, whether it was a new product that we were offering or other, and we would go and we would get dedicated hardware for that. Well, over the course of dedicated hardware for a particular application, or let's say the life cycle of that storage, is now over and we're migrating to something else because we got a better deal or whatnot. There was a constant churn in every environment that I've ever worked on when it came to storage. 1 minute we're doing, let's say NetApp storage. The next minute we're doing EMC storage. 2 years before that, we were doing on this other application where we're using HP. A year before that, where you're using IBM, all that's still around and that type of thing. And I think it's a bit, what's the word I'm looking for? I think it's a little unrealistic for anyone to think that VMware and vSAN or any other storage, platform for that matter is going to come in and completely wipe out everything else.
Yeah,
I really do. Right. But with that being said, what type of customers do we target? Everybody. Now, there from time to time there are use cases that we may not be the best on, or we may not be certified on yet, that type of thing. But then in other cases, we may completely blow away, some of the competition as far as that goes. Now, and when I say blow away, that could be performance related, it could be capacity utilization related, it could be flexibility related, or it could be even cost. Right? I mean, there's a bunch of different ways you can measure that whole blow away part of the conversation, but I remember talking with a healthcare customer about 2 years ago, and they were doing. It was a company in the U.S., but they had most of their deployments over in Europe. And what they would do is they would buy a new company, and then they would ship off a very, very small array. They would get everything migrated over to that array locally in that site, and then what they would do is they would then replicate everything back. And then once everything was replicated back, they would take that little bitty array that they had, and they would reclaim it, and it would basically go sit on a shelf. And I started talking to them, and I said, why are you guys doing that? And they said, well, we could use them, but then we've got all these interfaces of all these different places that we've acquired, and we've got to maintain them all independently. And I said, well, if you changed over to vSAN, then as soon as you brought those hosts back from the remote site, you can roll them right into the clusters that you have here, right? That type of thing. Going further, let's say today that you're a Dell customer, just as an example, right? Let's say you're Dell today, and then you find out tomorrow that HPE or Supermicro, Lenovo, whoever is going to give you a better deal. With vSAN, it's still vSphere on top, still the same exact management. Migrate everything over. You don't have to learn anything new. You don't have to worry about training people differently. People who can easily manage the the vSphere environment don't ever have to. I mean, obviously the vSphere environment changes from time to time. We had the old C# client and the web client. Still, and then in some environments now we've got the HTML5, Yeah, a lot of people do. But we had the if you go back, like when I was first doing ESX back in 04 timeframe, we had the MUI in the UI, which was a web-based interface on each host, pre vCenter days, that type of thing. But but those have a little bit of a lifespan, and there's not that much change, and it really doesn't matter what type of hardware you have underneath. That's the great part about it, right? Yeah. I mean, I've got two hosts. I think they're literally right below me in the basement, and they run the exact same interface that $50,000-$80,000 hosts would run, in a large enterprise. So. Okay. I mean, the great thing is to me also from an admin perspective, I can be, let's say, somebody based in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where I used to work, and I can be just in some little mom and pop shop, and I can very easily move to a larger location like Denver here, and I could very easily go to work for a very large company, and I don't have to learn anything new. I'm already poised for being able to manage it, just a different scale.
Yeah, I mean it's an intriguing product, and it's it clearly with the growth of ESXi and the addition of NSX and vSAN and putting the whole package together. I mean, it's a nice, pretty package with a nice little bow on top because you got it all now, and so that from that aspect of things, it makes sense to me. My next kind of follow up here is and a little bit of a self promotional plug. This Wednesday, I'm doing my second V Brown bag, and I'm talking about all of the pre stuff you have to do to deploy NSX.
Okay.
And like all of the material out of VMware that I've seen and heard and consumed talking about NSX deployments, it's all kind of do it quick, do it fast. You don't have to do anything, just turn it on and go. And I mean, that's not entirely true, but that's kind of what the marketing wants you to believe, is that you can just do it, just boom, 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 and it's done. But to really do it in production, of course, really do anything in production, there's a huge checklist of things you have to do first.
Mm-hmm. Yep, proper planning.
So that's sort of what I'm trying to cover in this V Brown bag, and is all the pre-deployment stuff before you even get to the point of deploying NSX Manager. So in terms of vSAN, what's all the stuff that you have to do? Like, what are the key, maybe 3 or 4 of the I'm sure there's a huge checklist, but what is some of the stuff that is easy to miss in the pre-deployment of a production vSAN rollout?
Well, so that's, I don't know, it's kind of a trick question. And the reason I say it's kind of a trick question is it really all depends on how you consume it. Okay. And what I mean by that
what are the differences in that then?
So there are a couple of different ways that you can consume vSAN. You can, first and foremost, for the people who want to do as little of their own homework, if you will, right? There's the appliance route, right, or the turnkey system type route, and we've got some of those from Dell EMC with the VX Rail, and then we've got some, I think, from Lenovo and Hitachi, that basically they do all the legwork, if you will, from a hardware selection perspective, sizing perspective.
And those are the ready nodes, right?
No.
No. Okay.
No. So, like VX Rail is an example. It comes with its own. I think when VMware used it with a bunch of other vendors, it was called Evo Rail, and then had like a little control piece called Marvin, right, which was kind of the code name for it, that type of thing. Right now, VX Rail is the only one that does that. They can literally go in and look at the entire, let's say, for instance, you start up from scratch. It'll go in, it'll discover all the nodes, it'll add them all, and all that stuff for you all automatically. Now, I don't have as much familiarity with the ones from Lenovo, Hitachi, and the others, but as I understand it, they're somewhat similar. Now, maybe not from a control plane perspective, if you will, but as far as, we've picked the hardware for you, we've made sure all the configurations ready to go and all that type of stuff. Now that's one, right? So then you've got what we call ready nodes. Now ready nodes, what they basically are, I think we work with 15 or so different vendors. We've got over 200 different servers that you can pick from. A lot of people are not really 100% familiar with the way that they work, and that they look and they say, well, this is this. Well, what if you want to add more RAM or add more disks or whatnot? You can absolutely do that, right? So a lot of people miss that piece of it. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like when I go to a website and I start picking out a server, and I want this controller and so on and so forth, right? Ready nodes will literally say, okay, if you want to run vSAN, and let's say you want to use as an example a Dell R740, I think is what it is, right? It's one of the latest 14 gens. Mm-hmm. Then we're going to have some pre-built options for that, and there's going to be a SKU associated with that. And when you go and you call Dell, you say, hey, look, I want this particular ready node, and I want to, let's say, double the RAM or whatever, right? Those kind of things. And when you get it, it's going to have vSphere already installed on it. May or may not be the same version that you have in production, depending on, what patch, version you're at. Yeah. Right. So in cases such as that, really, you just have to make sure that you've got your networking in place. And then for whatever version of vSphere that you want to run, whether it be 6.5, 6.5D, 6.5 Update 1, whatever, what you would then do is make sure that you've got the right driver for your storage controller. Now, we did add in 6.6 back in, I want to say it's been right at a year now. Mm-hmm. We added the capability with Dell server, with some equipment on Dell servers, Lenovo servers, Supermicro, and Fujitsu. We will actually look at the storage controller. We'll do updates for you on the storage controller, as well as driver and firmware, as well as download the tools for that.
Oh, wow.
So, like if you have an LSI based controller, like a 3108 based controller, we'll go and we'll download Store CLI so we can do additional work on that controller. Or if you've got a Dell H730, we'll download the PERC CLI. Those types of things. Okay. And that's kind of just the start. Now, going a bit further, if you want to, let's say you're doing a home lab, or let's say you're in a small environment and you want to take, let's say I've got some ninth generation, some G9 HPs, right? I would go and I would look at our VCG and I would say, okay, well, this controller is on the HCL for vSAN or it's not. And depending on whether it is or not, you may have to add a controller, right? And then we certify drives to be basically approved for use with vSAN. Now, Tony can probably address some of this, and he's had a couple, I think, challenges from a firmware perspective lately. But he went and wanted to expand his 4-node cluster, and we did a little bit of back and forth, some conversations, some of the different choices he could make, and he did a little bit of homework on his own, because I don't think he went with ready nodes, did you? I think he went with kind of a BYO type thing, right?
Yeah, roll your own.
Roll your own, yeah. And in the process of doing that, he picked which controller he wanted that was going to give him the most number of ports, the lowest cost, the best queue depth, so on and so forth, right? So there's a couple of different ways that you can go about doing it. Now, if you're one of those folks that don't, you don't really want to have to fool with it, then one of those appliance or turnkey type systems might be your best bet.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to be one of those people that's, on the cutting edge and you want to upgrade when you want to upgrade and those kind of things, then a ReadyNode may be a better fit for you. I would say that if you look at the BYO and you look at the ReadyNode and then you look at the turnkey appliance, type position as far as those go, if you think of roll your own, it's kind of like, and I got to throw a Jeep, reference in here, right?
There you go.
Sure.
Right. So let's say, for instance, I want to go and I want to, build a Jeep and I want to put the right gears in it and so on and so forth. And I don't really have visibility into before the next edition is announced. Like when I bought my 2017 JK, I knew the JLs were coming out, but I didn't have any information on it. I didn't know, what gear ratio they were going to use. I didn't know they were going to use a 345. I didn't know, what type of axles they were going to have, so on and so forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm going at with this, though, and kind of where it's pertinent is the roll your own type approach. You may decide, well, this is a good controller for me for today and for tomorrow, but what if I want to plan for 5 years out? Right. And I'm not picking on you, Tony. It's just, you had choices you had to make because of what you were working with already. Right. As far as that goes. But if you look at the ReadyNode perspective and you look at the pre-made turnkey and appliance type perspective, there's a little bit more back end, visual as far as the lifespan of this particular controller or this particular drive or that type of thing. Right. As far as those conversations. Now, that's not to say that depending on how big a customer you are. Right. So there's one, very large retail customer that I've done a fair amount of work with, and they decided to standardize on a particular controller and a particular drive combination. And they went to the OEM that they bought this from, and they said, look, this is what we want. This is what we're using it for. This is how many locations we're going to deploy it to. We want an agreement from you guys to be able to support this for this amount of time. And they entered into an agreement with that particular OEM, right?
Yeah, and we were an early adopter too, so we had some challenges there. There's things we didn't know about in terms of the ReadyNode program. If I had known about that at the time, we would have definitely gone that route, something that's more tested, tried and true, validated. So how does the ReadyNode program, that's slightly different from the VMware Validated Designs program, right? So
yeah,
how do those differ?
Well, so the VMware Validated Designs, and I'm probably not the best to speak to that, but VMware Validated Designs, the folks that put that together, Kyle Gleed, Ryan Johnson, and some of the other guys over there, Nick Marshall, whatnot. VMware Validated Designs are really about, as I would kind of approach them, it's really about like a validated vSAN type design deployment, right? So an example, I want to say that it was a while ago that I worked with them on stretch clusters with a VVD, and I think, and I'm hoping that I'm right in saying that like 4 point, I don't know, I forget the version number, but
what's a VVD?
So
VMware
VVD
Validated Design.
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
VMware
right,
Validated
right.
Design. So you could kind of look
like I
at
said,
it
I'm going to be asking the newbie questions here.
No, it's really kind of like a reference architecture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we had a lot of people asking for, let's say, Horizon 7 with this type of deployment using these type of applications and so on and so forth, then it might be common to get a VVD, right? Whereas a ReadyNode is really just we look at this piece of hardware. This hardware has passed our certification and validation to be a properly configured node for the purpose of vSAN. And ReadyNodes, actually, we have multiple, what's the word I'm looking for? Profiles when it comes to ReadyNodes. So we've got what we call hybrid ReadyNodes, and we've got all-flash ReadyNodes. And in all-flash, we've got like AF2, AF4, AF6, AF8, and they're all based on the type of workload you want to run on them. Let's say you're doing VDI and you want to have, let's say, X number of users. We would say, okay, an AF6 or an AF8 would work fine for you. That's kind of how you go and pick, right? That type of thing.
So it sounds like you're talking about the ReadyNode program is pretty much, this is set, tested, ready to go. This is fully validated in terms of hardware, a full solution. And then on the
well, it's per node though. but it's per node. It's not
node.
necessarily a full solution, right?
Okay.
So like a ready node, you would have to pick 2 for a 2-node, or you have to pick 3 or 4 or whatever.
Okay.
But let's say, for
Still
instance,
build your own cluster.
right. Let's say you were doing VDI, though, as an example, and you wanted to do 48 nodes. Well, and you wanted to do, because you hadn't either upgraded or you had a specific dependency, you wanted to use Horizon 6. Well, Horizon 6 and vSAN, we only support a maximum of 32 nodes. So a VMware validated design would say Horizon 6, 32 nodes with vSAN, as opposed to your 48 that you're trying to put together, right?
Gotcha.
So it's kind of, think of a VVD as put all the different pieces together. Like let's say, for instance, you want a stretched vSAN with NSX for the application layer, and you want a management pod and blah, 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 that type of thing. That would be a VVD type solution compared to a ready node. A ready node is essentially hey, I've got a piece of kit. It meets all the requirements, and depending on what your profile, you would pick this size or the next size or the next size, that type of thing.
So, Jase,
Awesome.
the old school server admin in me has always wondered, like you used to be able to, if you needed extra storage on a server, you used to be able to just buy a shelf of disks and plug it into an external SCSI adapter and run just a shelf of disks attached to a server. Can you still do that with this kind of thing or not?
Well, I think it would depend on the server and the controller that you have, right? For starters, but
would vSAN support those extra disks?
It would depend.
Okay.
It would depend.
Assuming
right?
that your controller supports and all that, but
yeah. Okay. So let me kind of back up a bit and talk about one of the reasons that I do like vSAN here, right? I remember at one point I had an IBM FastT 700 with a whopping queue depth of, I think, 2K. I mean, it was crazy, and we had, and this may date myself a bit, but we had 73 gig drives.
Ooh.
They were smoking, right?
Yeah.
They were smoking.
15,000 RPM?
Yeah. Well, I think they were 15K.
Yeah.
We may have had some 10Ks mixed in, but the important, the challenge is think about, like, specifically that scenario that you mentioned where I want to do an upgrade, right? Or I need to add capacity, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Where at one point, I think they were called EXP 700s was the DAE, the enclosure that we had to use, off of this FastT 700. And then it got to the point where we couldn't get them anymore. They were dated.
Yeah.
The only thing we could get was a 710. Well, we had to experience a little bit of downtime to upgrade all the firmware on the FastT 700 to be able to support the new DAE, right? And then on top of that, we couldn't get 73 gig drives anymore. We were forced to get 146s. So we literally had to make sure that we had, all 146s in our DAE before we could even get to the point where we could use any of that additional capacity, right? So there's a lot of waste. The thing I like about vSAN is, and this is back to that conversation of is a ready node best for me? Is a turnkey, type appliance best for me? That type of thing. If I go and I buy a server that only has, let's say, 8 drive slots, then I'm probably not going to be able to add more drives, right? Just because the system doesn't support it. Now, some systems like an FX2, you could actually attach it to a storage only node, or some of the HP Blade systems, you could do that as well, right? But if you wanted to, as an example, let's say, for instance, I went with a single cache device with 7 capacity devices, and all 7 of those capacity devices were 2 terabytes. Let's say, talk hybrid spinning drives. And I decided I needed to go from 2 terabyte drives to go to, let's say, 8 terabyte drives. With vSAN, it's really, really cool that you can actually say, take this disk, take it offline. Once it's offline, we've moved everything out and removed it. We can add that 8 terabyte in right away, add it back to the disk group, and immediately use it. Now, it's not going to be balanced. It's not going to be uniform and that type of thing. And we know that, but we do support it. And I would imagine we would expect you to probably swap all those 2 terabytes out to 8s at some point. But that's,
but
anybody
okay, I don't mean to jump on you, but
no, go ahead.
So you're saying you can basically pick one physical spinning drive out of the disk group and say, kill this disk so I can pull it out.
Well, decommission it.
Yeah. And then will it actually, like, make the drive flash on the thing itself, or
So there is an option within the UI where you can say make this drive flash.
Okay, because
Absolutely.
I had a problem with this analogy once where I pulled the wrong disc.
Yeah, I've been there.
Bad
there.
day.
Yeah, that was a bad day.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
what, Jace, real quick, what is a disk group for those that don't know?
So a disk group is kind of our smallest logical storage component, if you will, physically, right? And what I mean by that is from a vSAN architecture perspective, every host that contributes storage must have at least one disk group. Now that disk group must be made of a cache device. Let's see, here we go. A cache device and at least one capacity device.
Okay.
Now that capacity device could be a spinning drive or it could be a solid state drive, either way. Now we will support up to a maximum of 7 capacity devices in a single disk group. But let's say you've got a very large server, you've got enough slots, and you've got enough controllers. Some controllers will support SAS expanders, others don't, and then you would have to add controllers, that type of thing. But in cases such as that, where you actually had 40 different slots, then you could run basically 35 capacity devices with one cache for every 7, right? Now, going a bit further, we do support hybrid architectures where we've got I'll say a medium to high endurance cache device for the reads and the writes. We do a 70-30 split. 70% of it is a read buffer, and 30% of it is a read cache, and then 30% is a write buffer. But if you want to go the all flash route, which flash is becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper,
Yep.
you could do a high endurance cache device, flash device as cache, and then you could do what a lot of people refer to as read intensive drives for the I'll say for the capacity devices. Now, read intensive is kind of a joke in the industry if you really think about it. It's kind of like saying a car is really good at being parked. I mean, seriously.
Nice analogy.
I mean, all SSDs perform well when it comes to reads. It's just the nature of SSDs. Some SSDs have a better write endurance, that type of thing, right? And those are the ones that are would typically be used for a cache device, right? Now, if we're doing all flash, we don't do any type of reads within that cache device. We actually kick all that over to the capacity devices themselves, right? So that's where kind of disk group design and ready nodes and other kind of comes into play, where it's like, okay, am I going to get better performance if I have, let's see, one cache device and 6 capacity, or would I get better performance if I had 2 disk groups, one cache device each, obviously, and then 3 capacity devices, basically where I'm splitting that up. And that's kind of where that conversation comes of one versus the other when it comes to the design. Now, I will mention that we do deduplication and compression, and it kind of changes the behavior a bit when it comes to pulling a drive out. And the reason I say that is because we actually stripe that data across the entire disk group. So if we do lose a drive or we do remove a drive or that type of thing, then we do lose that disk group. If we have a cache device failure on whether it be hybrid, all flash with deduplication, if we lose that cache device, then we do lose that disk group. Now, some people kind of go, you're going to lose all that, well,
Yes.
That's where your design really is important. Do I have multiple disk groups? How many nodes do I have? Right. That type of thing, depending on what protection you choose, whether it's mirroring or erasure coding, depending on the type of hardware and the licensing that you have. You may want to choose to have one additional node than the minimum. And that way, if you do suffer a failure, then you can immediately write to to another device or to an open area, that type of thing. Those are all parts of the story to have. Now, I will say, because deduplication and compression is done on a per disk group level, we don't necessarily have the same consolidation ratios that you may see on an array that does like global deduplication.
Yeah, it's per disk group, right?
It's per disk group, right? Yeah. So if you think about it, like my 2-node cluster I've got running in the lab downstairs or in the basement, at one point I think I had 25x dedupe.
Nice.
Which is awesome, right?
Yeah.
But it's because I have one disk group on each host, and I have and because it's 2-node, I'm only doing mirroring. So I only ever had the same copies of data on the same disk group. So it deduped very well, right?
Okay.
I'm very reluctant when I see some of the marketing, literature that says, we can get up to X number of dedupe. Well, under the right conditions, we may, right, as far as that goes. But from the time I worked in the financial sector, from the time I worked in health insurance, from all the time I worked in military IT, as well as when I worked on airplanes, right? I mean, we had dual and triple redundancy for the systems that were the most critical, right? And if you think about vSAN and the way that we do deduplication at a per disk group level, if we ever happen to experience any type of corruption, it's localized only to the disk group. I remember hearing about a customer not too long ago that had a large number of VMs running on a single array that had global deduplication, and that particular array lost its metadata. And when it did, all the VMs were lost, and they had to recover from backup, right? All because of that one piece. Now, the great thing about vSAN is it's really isolated to every disk group.
So real quick on, you touched on this a bit earlier, but what is SPBM? What can it do, and how flexible is it?
So SPBM is storage policy-based management. Now, there's some things I'd like to see with it, which I've asked for, and some customers have asked for, which we're not there yet. But essentially, what it is we can apply a policy, storage policy-based management. We can apply a policy to a vSAN object, or if you happen to be using vVols with some of our partners that have vVol supported solutions, you can apply an individual set of rules to an object. And what do I mean by an object? That object could be the VM, namespace. It's VMX files, and it's NVRAM, and so on and so forth, as well as, let's say, any virtual disk that you have, or any snapshots or whatnot. Now, there is some inheritance and that type of thing, as far as that goes. But give a good example. If I look at, and I used to manage when I was in the financial side of the house, have managed about 250 different virtualized SQL boxes. And we would have a C drive, a D drive, an E drive. C for the Windows OS, D drive for all of our data, E drive for our log. And what we would have to do on the customers that, were the top tier customers, we would have the C drive on one storage array, we would have the D drive on another storage array that had a different, performance characteristic, and then we'd have E on another. And whenever we move things around, if we move from one LUN to another, we'd have to make sure we only move the right disks, right? That type of thing. Now, if I got to the point where I needed to, let's say, customer said, hey, we're seeing some latency in the app, and I really want to see some additional performance. Well, you could, let's say, enable some type of caching, let's say on the DLUN, if you will, as an example, or if they wanted a different stripe width, or if you wanted to move it to, let's say, solid state versus spinning, that type of thing. Those literally were those back to the conversation of what the storage admins had to do. They'd have to spin up a LUN with the new characteristics, and then they would go in, they'd move the workload over, and then they would look at the performance of it, and then the customer would say, or the application owner would say, yeah, it's just not really kind of where I want it yet. You didn't really make that big of an impact. And so the storage admin says, all right, well, let me move it back and we'll try something else. And then you go and you move it back, and then they try something else. And it's a lot of work. Whereas with vSAN, you really only have to change the storage policy. You just say, okay, well, this DVMDK, let's say it's on hybrid. Let me do a read cache reservation, and let me change the stripe width from 1 to 2 and see how that works. And then basically what we'll do is we'll make a copy of that VMDK and do a handoff, and then discard the original, and that new VMDK will have the properties of that particular policy. The great thing is you can literally do this via the UI, you can do it via API, you can tie it into Orchestrator, into VRA, cloud management platform. A real good example I've seen a couple customers use is, let's say, for instance, this one VM that they do monthly reporting on the last Thursday of the month. Well, on the last Wednesday of the month, they go and they change the storage policy. And they change the policy to have a cache reservation and change the stripe width. And then they go and they do their end of month reporting, and then they're done with that. And then they go and they go, and then that Friday, after they've got a confirmation of all their reporting being done, they change the storage policy.
That is some cool stuff. It's like that's
the secret sauce right there.
And that's reminiscent to me of like some of the stuff I've seen about AWS whenever they have that once a year thing, Amazon Prime Day. They, like, a couple of days before Amazon Prime Day, they, like, add in all this capacity.
Yeah.
And then as it's happening, they keep stepping it up and up and up and up and up and up and up. And then like 2 days after, it just boom, drops off a cliff and everything shuts down.
So you could really get creative with like vRealize operations and VRA and Orchestrator, where you could look at some of the ongoing performance metrics and have it trigger a change.
Mm-hmm.
And then once it gets, oh yeah.
You
So
can customize it on a per VM or a VMDK basis. That's pretty powerful.
It's a per VMDK, yeah.
So like I am like, my production SAN experience thus far is limited to Nimble.
Okay.
And like Nimble's big secret sauce, before they got acquired by HP. I don't know that HP's done a whole lot of changes to it yet, but they had their info site application where basically they would plug into your SAN or the SAN would report back to their thing, and effectively it was their way of pinpointing problems in your environment and showing that it actually wasn't the storage problem, it was something else. Can you get that kind of information out of vCenter and ESX or vSAN without adding on like vRealize operations or anything like that, or is it just
Jase, can you touch on the vSAN health interface? That was one of the next questions I had anyway. That'll be a good lead in.
Yeah. I think he's going down the same path, right, as far as that goes. So provided you're on vSAN 6.6 or 6.6.1, those are the latest releases, right? We introduced basically a thing called vSAN Support Insight, right? Yeah. So, and it's kind of a two-parter, right, as far as this goes. But with that, you are required to have what we call CEIP enabled, so the Customer Experience Improvement Program. Right. So basically that's one of those, anytime you install anything and it says, hey, do you want to share your information with whatever vendor, right?
The thing everybody always unchecks.
Yeah. People go, no, we don't want to do that. That's horrible. No.
Do you want to send data to Apple every time I set up a new iPhone? It asks me that.
So I'll say, and I can point at Tony here because I know that we've used it in his environment, right? But the awesome part about that piece, right, is the fact that we can, and I have no idea what Tony's host names are whatsoever, right? But when I go in and look at basically the UUID for his vCenter, it says, okay, he's got a 4-node vSAN cluster, and the server names are Han, Luke, Leia, and Chewbacca.
Okay.
And I mean, it completely anonymizes it, randomizes. I'm just using those as an example because I don't.
Host names, domain name, VMs, IPs, everything, MAC addresses are the only thing.
Everything is anonymized, right?
Okay.
And the great thing is
does that happen before it gets uploaded?
Well, as I understand it, it's anonymized before it gets to us,
okay.
Right?
All right?
And the reason I say that is because if you look in the vCenter
security
UI,
guy in me.
No. Completely understand. But there's a button inside vCenter that says download obfuscation map.
Oh, sure.
And so, so if I'm talking to Tony and I say, okay, can you look at server Chewbacca? Then what he'll do is he'll look his obfuscation map and he'll see, okay, Chewbacca is host 3. I'm being serious.
It's a serial box decoder ring.
I'm serious. And so what this does, the good thing about this is it gives us, the ability to, and it's not just, it's not just right now, but it's point in time. So it does it. I think it uploads about every hour or something like that. Just small, bits of information. But and we have all this publicly available. If people want to go and look for it, just do a search on VMware CEIP, and we've got, that'll point you in the right spot as far as that goes. Now that's just part of it, right? The good thing is though, is Tony could say, hey, look, I made this change. It's acting funny now, that type of thing. Well, we can literally say, well, when did the change occur? And we can look at a different point in time and see how the configuration changed. So that helps us as far as that goes. Now, at the same time, though, we did introduce a health check for vSAN back in in between 6.0 and 6.1. And it got rolled into vCenter as part of vSAN 6.1. And we got to the point where every time you got a new vCenter update, you'd get some new health checks and that type of thing. But one of the challenges was that you had to have that latest vCenter to be able to get those health checks, right? Well, now what we're doing as of 6.6 is we're also saying, okay, well, let's say, for instance, you've got, and we've seen some issues with these lately. It's kind of a problem with I think the firmware specifically, but the Intel X710 NICs. And I'm not trying to pick on Intel, but when we go and we look at your environment, we see that you've got Intel X710 NICs, then we will, in the health check, say, hey, look, you got those X710s, you might want to look at this KB article, right? So we are going a bit further in saying that, hey, look, if you've got this particular type of scenario, this type of configuration, that we're going to give you additional guidance there. Now, the great part about it is we can add more rules on the back end. So you don't have to change out your vCenter. So let's say, for instance, you get on 6.5 update 1, which is vSAN 6.6.1, and you're happy there for, let's say, a good year and a half or whatever. All those cloud health checks that we add are going to be added in the back end. Right, so it's not anything that you don't have to upgrade to a newer version to be able to get that. And over time, as we see anomalies and as we see situations that look a bit like they could be optimized, that type of thing, we will provide guidance. Right? Now, you do have to have your vCenter talking to the home office, that type of thing, but you absolutely can do that through a proxy if you don't want to directly provide access to it, to the net.
Right. Well, I mean, it's good. I mean, because if you're going to be competing against or even playing with other storage vendors, I mean, that's kind of what they all are trying to do in some ways: automate these processes and make the storage crazy simple.
Yeah.
I mean, this is sort of the one of the other things that always strikes me as interesting when I'm walking around VMworld is it's basically VMware and a whole bunch of storage vendors on the show floor.
Well, and some compute vendors,
a couple,
right?
A couple, but it's
then you've got all the folks that provide the additional add-ons with backup.
The backup thing is slowly taking over and becoming a bigger deal, but like and a lot of them are even stepping into the storage space. But it's just funny to me, like, man, it's like if you just take the 10,000-foot view of the VMware show floor or the exhibition floor, I mean, yeah, it's clear, what's important in the industry because, who's there and who's taking up space.
Well, for the longest time, VMware really had to have that, quote, shared storage, right?
Yeah.
It hasn't been until the whole HCI boom, has come around that you haven't really had to have that external storage array, that type of thing, whether it be, fiber-based or I'll say block-based to be more general, or, NFS-based, right? One of the two.
Yeah. So I've heard Tony talk about when he goes through his upgrades, there's these resync times where it takes a long time to get things back to normal.
It could.
My worst case scenario story that I had on Nimble, they at some point did a code change where they were changing sort of the algorithm of what this was on a hybrid array. They made a change to the code to figure out what gets cached and what doesn't, and we did a firmware upgrade without reading all the notes. And pushed a firmware upgrade in production, and it basically, once we and like one particular SQL box just hit a wall on performance after this upgrade went in. And so we call them and they start looking at it and they're like, yeah, it's this change in the algorithm on, the cache. And so basically it's going to take, a week or 10 days to get it back to normal. And, because it's just going to take the system that long to figure out what it needs to cache and what it not. So we kind of likened it to the firmware upgrade gave our SAN a sinus infection. It was going to work, but it was going to be really slow for a few days.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's kind of like the upgrade I did today with my Mac, right? I mean, I can't use one monitor because of a driver incompatibility.
So, like, I mean, is that kind of experience that I had? Obviously that happens occasionally when vendors do changes, but is that something that when a vSAN change happens, is there ways to mitigate some of that?
Well, I wrote a blog post about that, Britton. You retweeted You should go back and read it.
Thanks.
So
There's been a lot of improvements.
the big thing that I'd like to say about the way that we do things, within Sabu, the engineers, right? And when I was working for that financial service provider, we did our own software there. We did our own internal software when I was in the health insurance industry, that type of thing. But one of the things that I've noticed more often than not here at VMware is we're constantly improving, and it's funny. You go and you see a release, and it's like, oh, well, they're not doing much different here, that type of thing, while you're reading the release notes as far as new features. But what you may not see is the fact that we are doing a lot of stuff underneath the covers, and Tony has, of course. Now I will say we've been pretty aggressive. I've been here right at 3 years as of 2 days ago, and since I've been here, we've released. Let's see, when I got here, we released 6.0, and then we've done 6.1, 6.2, 6.5, 6.6, 6.61. I mean, we've got a pretty aggressive schedule as far as vSAN goes. But like Tony, as an example, was kind of the recipient of a process that was improved, right? As an example. So more often than not, we improve. Now, from time to time, we'll run into, like one little bug here that a very, very small number of customers may have a little bit different experience, that type of thing. But Tony, as an example, I remember when he was going from 6.2 to 6.5, and he had one host that kind of hung. Yeah. And when he did, because the algorithms that we're using in 6.2, it was basically once you execute or initiate a resync,
that host is dead to me.
You're gonna wait for that full resync to occur, right? Yep. Yeah. But and I remember talking to Tony the other day, and he was in the process of updating firmware, I think is what you were doing the other day. Yep. And he had increased his timeout before expecting a resync, that from 60 minutes to 90 minutes, and I know he was biting on his nails while he's waiting for that, counting down to that 90 minutes, and I think he went over the threshold. It was like, damn, 8 minutes. By 8 minutes, and his resync got kicked off. But then when that host came back, the algorithm said, okay, wait a minute. I can just do the deltas and be done this fast, or I can keep doing the full resync and it's going to take me this long, Mm-hmm. And the system was smart enough to basically say, I'm just going to do a catch up because that's more efficient, right? So that's just kind of one of the examples of things that we're trying to do to get better and better and better, as a product.
See, now, Jase, as I'm listening to you talk about this, mm-hmm. The feelings that I get, like.
Oh boy!
And this, bear with me. So it's the same dumb thing that happens, when I'm hearing anybody really smart talk about something that's really technical. I want to know more on how to do it. I want to know it all, but I can't. And it's the same thing with AWS. Last time talking with Chris Williams, there's this kind of stuff makes me feel like I can't be responsible for managing a vSAN array and ESXi and NSX and everything else. Like, and I feel like I know, but hang on. I feel like this is where a lot of other IT admins, especially probably IT managers, will hear and listen to someone talk about vSAN or even NSX or other things, and they think about all the other stuff that they have to manage in their day. And then they hear somebody talk about how, all these great features of vSAN or all these great features of this other product. And they're thinking, unless I hire somebody who knows specifically how to do this, we can't do it. And I can tell you now, I know like a handful of companies that's the case, where they won't deploy these things because they don't have the staff in-house that can do it. And they don't want to be beholden to an army of consultants to manage their environment.
Yeah, well, I've been there before in the army of consultants type environment, but the thing I think about vSAN and the fact of why it's taken off as well as it has, I think we've said we've got over 10,000 customers. I know that we've got quite a few more than that. I don't know if we've publicly mentioned how many we have, but we have said we've got more than 10,000. But with that being said, if you think about it, if with all of that you just mentioned, what if we also talk about having nimble as an array on the back end. And then we also have NetApp, and we also have, Unity, I think is what EMC has now as far as that VNX line, that type of thing. And that's kind of still kept things siloed to a point where you got the storage team, you got the virtualization team, you've got the networking team, and so on. And we're really doing our best, from at least the way I look at it, from VMware, and trying to really give, an easier management plane, if you will, not just from the core products themselves, but also the pieces like VRA and VROps and those types of things. Now, vSAN in the grand scheme of things is really pretty easy. Set it up and apply policies. A couple little nuances, like, you want to make sure you have enough additional slack space, and you don't want to change all your policies all at once, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you do that, you'll probably fill up your cluster. But in the grand scheme of things, vSAN is just essentially local storage as far as each of the hosts, can tell, as far as that goes. Now, I mean, there are some storage-centric decisions to make and that type of thing, but if you're already somewhat familiar with vSphere, at least from just a web client or traditional client, or even the new HTML5 client, whatever, if you can manage a VM, you can manage storage in the grand scheme of things. Now, there are going to be times where I've got to do a firmware update, or I got to change the driver, or things like that, right? Those are going to happen, but that's kind of where those, the ready nodes and the appliances kind of come into the mix to make everything easier.
Yeah, and I get that. I mean, I see that, clearly it's a product that's working well for VMware, and that's good. Mm-hmm. And I think that they're like you say, depending upon how people consume their data and how they want to set this stuff up, it may or may not even be a fit. But that's what this has just sort of been my experience, because of like I say every time on one of these shows, I'm a small business admin, and that's who I work for, and that's who I care about. And I know all those IT managers that I work with, every single one of them would hear all these overly technical talks about any product. It could be vSAN, it could be NSX, it could be ACI from Cisco, it could be a whole bunch of other stuff, and all of them are going to look me in the face and say, we can't do this because I don't have the internal staff to manage it. And they're just going to do whatever is easiest and whatever they can fit in their budget to run their environment, because they're not some massive company with a massive budget. And it's and I'm, as a consultant, I'm fighting that uphill battle to get them to realize that if you outsource 1% of it, we can make it that much easier for you. And that, that's what I have to fight up against every day, is getting people to realize that, these things are a little bit easier than maybe you think, but I end up fighting some of the technical jargon and try to, narrow it down so that people actually say, okay.
Yeah. And I think that the vast majority of folks who spend a little time managing vSAN understand it's really pretty easy to use and manage, right? Now, with that being said, though, there's a conversation of what's a good fit. Let's say, for instance, I've got a particular customer that I'm, as a consultant, I may be talking with, and let's say they're a 100%, all, let's say, pure shop as an example, right? Good gear. And then, let's say there's an opportunity where they just see, something small, let's say something in the DMZ, or like a management cluster, that type of thing. Management cluster is a good little fit for vSAN, a 4-node redundant, cluster for the VMs that manage the rest of your environment. Mm-hmm. People look at it and they go, well, and then I always bring up the conversation of, well, what if the VM that you use to manage your environment is running on the storage that you're managing? And then you have an issue with that storage, then your management tools are essentially gone. And in cases like that, vSAN could be a really good fit. Who knows? Maybe they really like it and they decide they want to, completely replace the rest of their infrastructure. That's an entire possibility. Yeah. But one thing that I did notice as being a customer, for 15 years was, depending on the time of the day, which year it was, what the budget was, what the features were, who was schmoozing who and whatnot, you could have anything in your environment. And the best we can do, as far as vSAN, is just try to meet all the needs and play well with everybody.
Yeah.
As far as that goes. Whether if you're a Dell consumer, if you're an HPE consumer, Lenovo, whatever, that's the great thing about vSAN is you don't have to learn anything new, and we work with pretty much everybody. As far as that goes. But I mean, I see a lot of customers that have a large number of different types of storage deployed. And they may say, look, we want VMAX just for this, and this is all we will ever use it for. And we've got, we need X number of nines and whatever, right?
Yeah.
They may be comfortable with that, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. I'm not the type of person. Obviously, I'm not field or sales, that type of thing, but I'm not going to try to force my product into a situation that doesn't fit.
And this is probably just my issue mainly, but because I become a curmudgeon about some of this stuff, and like like for me, even like when I first started playing around with NSX, I mean I was consuming all this technical data and marketing materials and all these things about how you set it up and how you get it going and all this stuff, and it wasn't probably until I had installed it for the 7th time and got it fully working that all of a sudden I realized, oh, it's really just software and networking. And it was like this, it was like this facepalm like epiphany moment of, oh, it's really not that hard at all. It's just software you're networking in a software stack. You manage it exactly the same way as you would networking in a stack of switches. And ever since that moment, I was just like, oh, well, that's that. But it took me leaps and bounds of work to get there, and I know because from talking to people, they're in the same boat where they're trying so hard to understand it that they miss the opportunity to do it, and that is that's part of the reason why I even became a consultant, was so that I could help people get over those things faster. And that's probably my issue with vSAN is I've honestly never deployed it. I've never done anything with it. And so.
Yeah. It takes a little, I mean, Tony, how long have you been using vSAN?
I've been using it for a couple of years now.
Okay. But when you first got into it, were you experiencing kind of the same? I mean, there is a little bit, anytime you pick up any type of new storage, but I would dare to say that the challenge of, like I remember when I was had NetApp, had NetApp, had IBM, had HP, and then we bought a ton of EMC, and so I had to learn that, and we went from aggregates to a different construct as far as forget the term that we use specifically when we would put some of the disk groups together, that type of thing. But I think the great thing about vSAN and really the HCI space in itself, even the competitors that we fight against, that type of thing, is the fact that it kind of brings everything to a single. And I hate to use the term pane of glass. I'm not a fan of the phrase.
Yes, because we all need more dashboards in the world.
Yeah. Let's see. All right. I mean, I heard Josh Fidel, one of our SEs, was talking the other day, and he said it was a single, what was it? Single glass of pain, I think is what he called it. But to the point, I mean, if you look at the storage industry and working with vSphere, NetApp did it, EMC did it, many of the other players did it, where you could have a plug-in within the vSphere client, and you could go and provision storage and whatnot, right? You could do all that, and we've kind of moved that route, for quite a while. So I don't think it's that big of a departure, from the HCI space, and in that people will kind of do the same thing and kind of do it all from a single spot, that type of thing.
Well, I think from my perspective, when I first started using vSAN, I was, once the back-end design work, the architecture work is done and you're implementing it, you turn on a single switch and boom, you claim your disks and you're off to the races, you're up and running. I was actually amazed by how simple that part of it was. You get used to some of the more technical details of things to watch out for. I learned a lot from Jase. I learned a lot from fellow vExpert community members and learning online, etc. And one of the things that sold me on it when we were talking to VMware in terms of like a pitch is one of my main concerns was, how do you manage it? How do I handle this array when it comes to patch windows, updates? How does this work? What kind of interface do I need to go into? This is, before I had any prior knowledge of it. And everybody said the same thing. Nothing changes. You take a host into maintenance mode, you take it offline, you upgrade it one host at a time, obviously, because you have to do rolling upgrades in that respect, but that wouldn't be any different than a normal array without vSAN. So that's what sold me personally on it, is I didn't have to change any of my behaviors. There's definitely some things to learn and some things that you need to pay attention to, but I wouldn't say that it's anything more difficult.
Well, and I would also say that we at VMware have been doing a lot to try to provide significantly more visibility than the early days, right? So if you think of
it's improved a lot
1.0
since I started.
Yeah, oh yeah. If you look at 1.0, which was rebranded as 5.5, we didn't have nearly as much visibility. 6.2, we kind of standardized the API and provided a lot better reporting specifically within the vSphere UI, where we can go and look at the performance of an individual VMDK, look at the performance of a host, the performance of a disk in a disk group, the whole disk group, whatnot, right? Well, that got even better with 6.6, where we can go in and look at not only virtual NICs, and when I say virtual NICs, VM kernel adapters, we can look at physical adapters, right? Whereas if I think about troubleshooting from a traditional storage perspective, I'll have to go and I'll have to look. Well, I'm going to look within vCenter, and then I've probably got to look on my switch, and then I probably got to look in the logs of my storage array, that type of thing. Whereas we expose all of that. Now, going even further, we've got some really good integration with vRealize operations. And then if you're one of those folks that likes some, troubleshooting dashboards, Log Insight, when you go and you set it up, you can have it automatically send all the logs over to Log Insight, and you can get some really good out-of-the-box dashboards to give you better visibility. Now, obviously, those are other places to look, right? But kind of where I'm going at with this is, before it was kind of I remember when I worked at EMC, we had a product called, it was SRM, not VMware SRM, but it was Storage Resource
Manager.
I forget what the A stood for, but it was, I'm sorry. Yeah, Storage Resource Manager. That's what it was.
Wow, that was a total guess.
Yeah. So, and it's funny too, because it was actually, I think, around before VMware SRM. But the purpose of that product was to be able to give you better visibility further down the stack. Like I'm seeing latency in this disk, and I'm seeing connectivity issues on this port, and so on and so forth. And you could point it at a very large environment, right? But we're taking a lot of those same type of reporting metrics and putting them in the vSphere UI. Now, because they're in the vSphere UI, you can get to them with all of our APIs. You can get to them with Power CLI, or you can get to them with Log Insight or vRealize operations. We've even been smart enough to take if you think about a internal health reporting type thing in a typical storage array, if from a vSAN perspective, if we were to leave that on the hosts, if a host fails, we've lost that data. Well, we actually have our performance collection service running on vSAN itself.
Wow.
And we make it resilient.
Configuration assist mode as well to help you kind of delve in.
Yeah. Config assist is one of those great. It's one of those questions. Like I was talking with someone recently, and they said, "Okay, well, I've got 4 hosts. This is somebody that's actually doing some documentation for some POC gear we've got, and they had never used vSAN before, or at least not since 5.5. And they said, "Okay, well, how do I go and set all this up?" And I'm like, "Well, just follow the instructions that I gave you." And they were like, "So I don't have to manually tag a NIC for vSAN traffic?" I'm like, "Nope. I don't have to tag a VM or a VM kernel interface for vMotion? Nope. I don't have to enable HA and DRS through the HA DRS process? Nope. You just do it all through configuration assist."
Yep.
Now if that's not enough for you and you want even more hand-holding, then obviously we've got the appliance route, like the Dell VX Rail, offering. But it's kind of really what's most important to you, what level of interaction do you want, and that type of thing.
Awesome. Well, I think that's going to wrap up the vSAN talks. We appreciate all the good insights and information in there.
Yeah.
I think it's time for some Jeep thoughts by Jase McCarty.
Jeep
Jeep
Thoughts
I love it.
by Jase McCarty.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, Jace, what was the first Jeep you owned?
So it's funny. I got into Jeeping very, very late. I've wanted a Jeep, my whole life. I was looking at the CJ5s, CJ7s back in the day before I could drive, and it just didn't work out. It wasn't really, at the time, a practical vehicle. I thought, that type of thing. And then I just got a wild hair in March of 2013 and bought I thought I had done enough research and that type of thing, and in fact I hadn't. And I buy and I wanted to be able to do, get in the mud and go rock crawling and all that other kind of stuff. And I buy this black. It was gorgeous Jeep, 4-door. JKU is what they refer to them as, Sahara. Well, if you don't know anything about Saharas and sports and Rubicons and that type of thing, then you'll realize that a Sahara is basically a sport with some, additional stripes and maybe leather seats and heated seats and whatever. But, I wanted to make sure it had, towing on it so I could tow, a pop-up camper that we had at the time. And I didn't realize that it only had a hitch. It didn't really have the towing package, which would have given me better gears. I could have run bigger tires and so on and so forth. And to really change all that stuff out, it was, a new differential for the front as well as re-gearing and all that other kind of stuff was going to run me, on top of the cost of the Jeep, maybe another $15,000 to $20,000, which
Yikes.
to do what I wanted to do with it, that type of thing. And I'm like, man, I mean, I don't want to say that Rubicons are the only way to go. Plenty of people will do sports and they'll keep the Dana 30 front end and in the front, or Saharas with Dana 30s in the front, and that's fine. And they'll just they'll upgrade their gears, and then they'll do what they call truss and gusset, where they basically reinforce their axles and that type of thing, right? But like I said, I could have done that, but I kind of wanted to go kind of middle of the road as far as performance goes. I wanted to be able to have locking differentials that I could, select if I needed to. I wanted to be able to have a beefier, front axle, that type of thing. So I decided to go the Rubicon route back in. I ordered on Veterans Day in 2016, and it took 81 days for the Jeep to show up. So,
Wow.
because I had to wait for the Christmas, lull to go to pass, all that kind of stuff. There were other people who ordered literally 3 days before me that got their Jeep in a month.
Wow.
So
So, with all of your Jeep adventuring, what's kind of the craziest situation you've found yourself stuck in?
I don't know. Haven't done a whole lot of mud riding. I'm not a big fan of the mud side of the house because it's a pain in the tail to clean.
Yeah.
But we do a thing, and I hate that I'm missing it. It's actually coming up in about 2 weeks. There are quite a few of us that get together every year for a jaunt to Moab, Utah, which is kind of like the mecca, if you will, of jeeping and off-roading. They have the Easter Jeep Safari every Easter there.
Okay.
That just finished up. But so it's me, and the guy who brought me into it was a guy by the name of Dave Alexander, who works for WWT. He's UCS Dave on Twitter, or UCS_Dave, that type of thing. So Dave, and then a guy that works at Dell EMC by the name of Chris Seacott, Jonas Rosland, another guy that works at Dell, or actually Jonas just came to work for us at VMware. Andy Banta at NetApp SolidFire, Jay Metz from Cisco, Jack Poehler from ESG Group, and a bunch of folks will get together, and we have a thing called Geeks with Jeeps.
Nice.
Now, I haven't taken my Jeep out there just yet. It was kind of a drive from Louisiana, where I used to live, over to Moab. So I didn't get my own personal Jeep, but you can rent Jeeps. We rented from a place called Twisted Jeeps. And it was about $260, $270 a day, something like that. And you get a couple of people together, and we go in together, and it's really good. And we've done some pretty hard trails. The last time I went, last year, my wife came along, and it was kind of interesting. Some of the trails that you would think are the, fairly difficult and kind of scary. My wife, like a champ, the poison spider V-notch, where you've literally got this thing like this. Actually, it's kind of like that. And you park one wheel right here and then one wheel on this side, and you straddle it. you know. Oh yeah. She did great, right? I've got another video on my phone where she went to do a climb, and she's literally like this, and she can't get anywhere, and the Jeep is just about to tip over backwards, and then she comes down, and she moves about 3 feet over, and then she gets a little bit better, rate going, and she just right on up. So,
Wow.
whether it be Metal Masher, Hell's Revenge, stuff like that. I mean, Moab's a really really great time. Since moving to Colorado, I've been on a couple different trails. I've been on the Longwater Gulch Trail, which is not impossible. It's got one fairly decent obstacle. Been on, I forget the name of that other one. And then most recently did one called the Meta something or other trail. That's a great thing about where I live in Colorado. Literally most decent trails kind of around where I live, I can get to in about a half an hour. Right?
So how does that work then with these things? Because can you just go on any old trail, or do they have specific things mapped out that you can drive on, or?
Well, so you'll typically have a trailhead, and it'll be labeled. It'll say, this is the Longwater Gulch or whatever, and there's typically a map associated with it, that kind of thing. Now, there are some trails here that you do have to get approval on. I think you've got to buy like some type of
because this is like
permit.
is this like government land you're on, or is it?
Some of it is, and some of it's private.
Okay.
But highly recommend. I'll give a little shout out here to the Colorado Backroads and Four-Wheel Drive Trail version 3. It actually has all the different trails and where to go, what to expect, and that type of thing. Now, depending on the trail, most of them, if they have some type of difficult obstacle, there's typically a go around. If because off-roading is really open to anybody and everybody. It's not just jeeping. I think the last trail we went on, we got passed by like 4 or 5 FJ Cruisers, and then we see a lot of XJs, Jeeps like the old Cherokees, and then you see people on razors and dirt bikes, and and everybody's nice and cordial, and if somebody gets stuck, everybody jumps in to help, and it's just a good time.
Yeah, I back in like 2008, 2009 during the financial crisis, there was some I think it was a Comedy Central spoof on these guys who were a Hummer club. And they were talking about how because of the financial crisis, they couldn't afford to drive their really expensive Humvees up hills anymore, and it was this really sad story. And these guys are crying because they can't drive their Humvees anymore. And
well, so somebody asked me one day if there was anywhere that my Jeep couldn't go, and I'm sure there's some places physically my Jeep can't go, but I joked and I said I can't go past a gas station. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And be honest with you, Jeeps, it's a big box on wheels, right? I mean, it's not really aerodynamic as far as that goes. And the transmission, the 5-speed auto in the JKs, it has been around for, since 07 to 18. It's not that great. They say the new one's got an 8-speed transmission that's a lot better and drives better, but they still get about the same gas mileage. Now you crank your tires up, put bigger gears in or taller gears in, and your gas mileage is going to kind of
suddenly you lose efficiency. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But if you think about it, when I got my Jeep, I was getting about 17 miles to the gallon, and I think when I'm really wheeling it hard, I get about 14. So it's really not that big of a difference, right? The interesting part, though, is I actually get better gas mileage in the city than I do on the interstate.
Wow.
Tire howling, creating some aerodynamic resistance.
Now it's funny though, because my Sahara that I had 321 gears and had just regular sized tires, I got between 19 and 21 miles to the gallon.
That's not bad.
No, not considering it's a box, right?
Yeah.
As far as that goes, it's like, would you rather have miles to the gallon or would you rather have smiles to the gallon? So, I mean. Because if you think about it, with obviously, whether it be posting stuff on Instagram or you're, doing YouTube videos, with your GoPro, or you've got a DJI, drone or whatever, that kind of thing. You'll never think back to the time where you got 39 miles to the gallon.
Right.
but you'll think about the time that you almost rolled your Jeep, or you think about the time that you had one wheel in the air and that kind of stuff, right? So it's a trade-off, Unfortunately, I only ever have to drive to the airport, so it's not that big of a deal.
Cool.
Well, Jace, this has been a lot of fun. We do have a couple of more questions for you, though.
Okay.
Who do you suggest we talk to next? Did you just see my Twitter post?
I just see Jeep Thoughts with Jase McCarty. That's awesome. Who to talk to next? You mean somebody maybe from the VMware side, or anywhere?
Anybody. Really. I mean,
anybody in the community.
If you're seeing somebody who's doing something really cool in virtualization or IT or cloud stuff or whatever.
Oh man, that's a good question. I be honest with you, I think and one name comes to mind, not only because I see him over here on Twitter, but it might not be a bad idea to reach out to a neighbor of mine here in town. And I say neighbor, I mean, he lives about 15 miles away, right? But Scott Lowe, right? Scott has been a really good mentor within the virtualization space and networking and other for the longest time. And he just recently took that big, leap, moving from, one ecosystem to a bit of a different ecosystem, related to some degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he just moved from VMware over to Heptio, I believe it is. I believe that's how you pronounce it. He might be a good person to reach out to for an interview. Kind of where he is. I don't know. It might be good to wait until he's been there a couple of weeks. He's only been there a week so far, but.
Well, we're on like a once a month schedule right now, so.
Oh yeah.
Okay. I probably wouldn't get to him till June or July if he was available.
Yeah, somebody else that's really, and because you're obviously very well spoken on the NSX side and familiar with that side, have you guys had Tim Davis on by any chance?
Not
he
yet.
Was just at our user
we
con.
We just ran into the user con.
Yeah, he would be a good guy. He is a nut. Yes, yeah, Tim, I said that. If you heard that, he is a nut. Awesome dude. He's been with us for a couple of years, but heart of gold, great guy, and he'd probably be a good person to talk about NSX. If not, maybe Sean Odell, right, from the networking side, at VMware, because Sean was with NSX, and then he moved over to what was it?
Arkin.
Yeah, Arkin. And then Arkin got acquired, and he was a member of Arkin, and he kind of came back. He might be good to give more visibility from kind of what the Arkin side of the product brings and how it really expands on the value prop of NSX.
I would love to talk with Scott Lowe. I'm sure that he's over his head busy at the moment, but
I'm sure.
But yeah. And we'll have to. I mean, Tony, you have more contact with him ever than I ever had. So between,
I'm trying to think, who else?
Maybe like Jase, next time you run into him, you can tell him how great of an experience this was being on our show, and
okay,
and then
give us a little pitch.
Yeah,
I'll tell you somebody else though that comes to mind, that another Jeeper that comes to mind that might be a good person to have a conversation with is maybe Jason Nash, right? Jason's a big network guy, right? And he took a little sabbatical for a while, and I think he's come back, and he's at Rubrik
now. So Jason Nash, he's kind of my NSX hero.
Oh boy.
Because when I first found NSX as a product, I was searching high and low everywhere, like, how do I deploy this thing? There was no documentation anywhere. And he just happened to release this
Pluralsight.
Here's how you do it on Pluralsight. And I watched that, and I'm just like, oh, thank you, Jesus. This guy would give me exactly what I need. And, he steps you through the whole thing, and I'm just like, this guy's a genius. And so,
he's awesome, no nonsense, tell you like it is. Now, he sounds more Southern than I do. I'll give you that.
That's okay.
I'll give you that. He sounds more Southern than I do. But
I had requested Jason add me on LinkedIn, and he just did last week, so I have an in with him now. So I will.
Somebody else from the Rubrik side that might be good to have on is Rebecca Fitzhugh.
She's come up before, so.
Oh, she has been on?
No, she's been suggested before. So
Yeah, she's really talented, and I'd say a good mover and shaker in the space.
Yeah.
So
two
impressed with
two companies that I want to really understand better is Rubric and Cohesity. Both of them. And I honestly, if they would do it, I would love to get somebody from each company on the same episode.
I don't know.
Good luck with that one.
And I'm sure
the guy that I would.
I'm sure
the guy I'd reach out to at Cohesity would be Rollinson.
Yeah,
Rollinson would be a good person to speak to there.
But yeah, so I mean, I'm gonna try and schedule this thing out as far in advance as I can. But next month, we have Ariel Sanchez Moore coming on. And
another nut.
Yeah, he was.
We spent a couple days with him.
Yeah, we spent a couple of days with him at the UserCon. Super great guy.
He is.
And that's going to be coming here in May, early part of May.
Somebody just came to mind. Somebody else. And he'll probably kill me for saying his name, but Steve Kaplan.
Steve Kaplan. I'm not familiar.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know Steve.
Do you know what I'm talking about, Steve Kaplan? Yeah. And I forget the name of the company. I think it's Covaris.
He was on our VMware code team.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Now he recently came from or he went to Covaris, I believe it is, he was kind of in a government type job, but he's got a lot of knowledge as well, and I think he would be a very colorful person to speak with.
Cool.
Giving you props, Steve.
All
so.
Right. Cool. Okay. Well, this has been highly in depth as I figured it would be on vSAN and other things alike.
We didn't even go too much into the weeds.
I know. And you think you didn't, but you might be wrong there. And of course, there's always just a million things we could talk about more, but we're already well over an hour here.
Well, the big thing that I want to say though is to anybody watching, or listening, for that matter, that type of thing is participate.
Yeah.
Be part of the community, right? Whether it's a networking focused community, compute focused, application focused, storage focused, whatever. Be part of the community, right? Mm-hmm. People, quite often think that they don't have anything to bring to the table when they absolutely do, right? Mm-hmm. I highly recommend people attend VMUGs, and if there's an opportunity for you to speak or whiteboard or whatever, take the opportunity to, right? When I was a customer, I never imagined I would be on the vendor side ever. And then I participated quite a bit in the VMTN forums and, provided some answers, asked some questions, whatnot. Met some really, really great folks, really good buddy of mine. I've known him for, 13, 14 years now. Steve Beaver, a guy that I got rolled into kind of last minute on a book on VI3, actually. So he and David Marshall and I all worked together on a book. But the important part that I'm trying to get to is if I hadn't been part of the community, mm-hmm. I couldn't have learned what I learned, and I couldn't have got to the point where I'm now contributing and sharing as in the fashion I am, right?
Yeah.
So I think you guys are doing a great job by having the Gigacast, and bringing that. I mean, obviously there are tons of podcasts and tons of, but they, to me, as long as we're furthering the conversation, whether it be technology-wise or processes-wise or whatever, as long as we're sharing and people can consume that, whether they actually come back and contribute to it, mm-hmm. It's good, right? And, Tony, you and I probably wouldn't know each other if it weren't for community, right?
Exactly.
VMUGs and whatnot. So I challenge anybody that thinks that they don't have a good message to share, that they should share it. If you've learned something, there's going to be somebody out there that doesn't know what you've learned. Mm-hmm. And if you tell them, hey, look, this is what I experienced, this is why, so on and so forth. I didn't really understand it. I do now. Here's why, whatever, so on and so forth. Don't look at it as don't look at any opportunity of sharing failure as you messing up, but as more of a learning experience. And if you can share that with somebody else and you can help them, that's awesome. And I try to work with quite a few people in the industry, and I kind of mentor a bit, and nothing would please me more. if somebody that I mentored and somebody that I helped that may be, 5 years younger than me, 15 years younger than me, whatever, if they end up being more successful than me, hey, I think I've done what, part of what God has kind of put me here to do as far as that goes.
All right. Well, hey, thanks a lot, Jase, for coming on and chatting with us. We appreciate it. We'd love to have you back at some point.
Sounds good.
And so when I'm whenever maybe when VSAN 7 comes out or something like that. Yeah. So, all right. Thanks again, and
thank you.
We will again talk to you, our listener folk, here sometime in early May. We're still kind of working out the scheduling of that whole recording, but the episode with Ariel is forthcoming. All right. Thanks, Tony. Anything else you want to add before I play us out?
That's it.
All right.
We're good.
So that was Gigacast episode 14 for Sunday, April 8th, 2018. Again, we're coming back at you next month in May with Ariel Sanchez more. He is a super nice guy, very knowledgeable, big-time V community advocate. That's going to be a fun one as well. Thanks to Jase for joining us. He is at Jase McCarty on Twitter. Tony is at Import Car Guy on Twitter. I am at VCIXNV. Keep looking. Eventually here we're going to have a website at gigacast.net. That's in the works. Otherwise, thanks for listening. We'll catch you later.